Good morning. Could everybody take their seats so we could get started? Thank you. I'm Cliff Cashton. I'm Director of the Division of Pediatric Nephrology, and it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our Grand Rounds speaker, Michelle Rheault. Michelle is an Associate Professor of Pediatrics in the Division of Pediatric Nephrology. I don't want to use up Michelle's time by listing all her distinctions and honors. I just want to highlight a couple of things. Michelle is a member of the program committee for the 2018 annual meeting of the American Society of Nephrology, and she's visual abstract editor for the Clinical Journal of the American Society of Nephrology. And Michelle's topic today is Communication for the 21st Century, Social Media in Medicine. Thank you.
Right, so thanks for coming. Social media used to be the new way people communicate with each other, but that was 10 years ago. Today, it's just another tool that we use to communicate with each other, with our patients, and with just for recreation. So my goal today is to have you all looking at your phones by the end of the talk, using social media and figuring out how you can do this for good. So the rules are I have to tell you my conflicts of interest. So I have research funding from Novartis, Rheault, Rheault, Regulus, and Roche, which are part of my clinical trial work that I do. But the good news is we're not going to talk about any of these today. This is not your grandfather's nephrology grand rounds. We are only going to talk about these as regards to avoiding conflicts on social media. So just to start off a little bit, I think I've met most of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm a pediatric nephrologist. I've been on the faculty since 2008, so I'm approaching my 10th anniversary, which I think means I get a Rolex or something, but I'll let you know. I'm the medical director of the pediatric dialysis unit, which is just across the hall here. If you've never seen it, it's beautiful. We're really proud of it, and it's the only pediatric dialysis unit in the state of Minnesota. And I'm also a clinical researcher. We do research on glomerular diseases and Alport syndrome. And when we're talking about social media, it's also very important to tell you who I am not. This is a picture from my bedroom. This is my VCR. And you'll notice on the top it says Michelle's tape. And if you remember back then, you had to have your own tape because, God forbid, your husband might record over ER and it was grounds for divorce. So I don't like technology. I'm not a technologically inclined person. I don't like computers. I don't like new things. And you don't have to be that person in order to use social media. So Blanche, even you can use social media. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Facebook and Twitter, which are two of the bigger platforms of social media. And we'll talk about some of the good things about social media, and we'll also talk about some of the pitfalls that you might run into along the way and talk about how to avoid those. Then we'll talk a little bit more about Twitter because that's a little bit more of a professional platform that people use for career development in medicine. We'll talk about who to follow, what to do, what are you supposed to say on Twitter. And then finally, and sprinkled throughout the talk, we'll talk a little bit about why. Why should you be on social media? So when the current residency class was starting high school, it was around the same time that Facebook was born. And by the time they graduated from medical school, Facebook had about 1 billion users. That's billion with a B. So the current young physicians and new faculty have really been exposed to social media their entire adult life. So this is something that they are familiar with, are comfortable with, and this is the way that young people get their news and information. So us older physicians need to be there too. So we're going to start with talking about Facebook because most of us have some passing experience with Facebook, at least until maybe last week when you deleted your account because of the privacy issues. But how many people here have a Facebook account? Just by a raise of hands? Yeah, so just about everybody, or has at some point. So this is a pretty common experience. You log onto Facebook and you find the friend request, not from an acquaintance that you knew from high school 20 years ago, but from one of your patients. Has this ever happened to you? And another share of hands, how many people have ever been friended by patients on Facebook? Yeah, so quite a few. So before we talk about what are you supposed to do in that situation, we have to talk about the rules. So everybody has a social media policy, and because of where we are and just our unique situation, we're covered by many of them. So there's a University of Minnesota policy, a UMP policy, and a Fairview social media policy. And as it relates to patient friending, they all say a variation of the same thing. Just don't do it. Some of them even go farther and say there may be consequences to your medical license as it relates to crossing professional boundaries. So just don't friend patients on social media. Most of the social media policies are a long list of problems with really no discussion of benefits, and they're all a little bit different. The University of Minnesota social media policy is very focused on don't use the block M in your social media profile. Like, that's not allowed at all. Don't even think about using the block M unless you have official approval. They also state you can't use the UMN initials in your username. So I couldn't be UMN Rheault as my username on Facebook or Twitter. They just don't want you to do that. All of these social media policies tell you not to use your work email address to set up your account. So if you're setting up a social media account, you should be doing that through your personal email account, your home Gmail account, or whatever that may be. The University of Minnesota physicians site is very clear that you should be saying that you're acting in your own capacity. So you should have some sort of disclaimer on your site saying that comments are my own and do not represent the views of my employer, or tweets are my own, or some variation of that, so that it's clear that these are your words and you're not speaking in an official capacity. And the Fairview account says a little bit more about using social media at work. You know, don't use social media at work unless it's related to your job. So I promise that as I've been looking through Twitter the past 2 days putting this talk together, it's all been related to my job. The other thing that Fairview and the UMP social media policies talk about is HIPAA, and HIPAA counts on social media as well. So if you wouldn't share something with someone standing across from you, don't share that on social media. Mayo Clinic has dumbed this down a little bit, and they've created a 12-word social media policy. And I think this is pretty good, and it gets the ideas across. Don't lie, don't pry, don't cheat, can't delete, don't steal, and don't reveal. These are all things that you should be thinking about every time you share something on social media. So back to that friend that wanted to be your, or that patient who wanted to be your friend on Facebook. What are you going to do? So clearly, as we've said, you're going to reject it. You're done. You're not going to be friends with them, and you don't have to think about it anymore. Which is great until they walk into clinic next week, and it's very awkward, and they know you didn't friend. They know you didn't accept their friend request, and it's just uncomfortable for everybody. So what can you do? Well, instead of just rejecting them, you can send them a message. Sorry, John, and this is what I do for patients who try to friend me. Sorry, Johnny, I reserve my Facebook for personal friends, and I don't friend any patients or coworkers. The U of M Masonic Children's has a public social media site where patients are welcome, and you direct them there. So instead of rejecting them, redirect them. Make it clear that these are your boundaries, but give them an avenue to follow and to engage with the hospital in another way. So next we're going to talk about patient privacy. So we've talked a little bit about HIPAA and making sure that you follow HIPAA. And these rules can be a little bit tricky online. So Alexandra Thran was a hospital-employed emergency doctor in Rhode Island who inadvertently violated confidentiality by revealing details in a Facebook post. And she didn't reveal the patient's name, but she did include enough that others in the community could identify who it was by some of the details that she put in. If you're in a small town, and believe me, Minnesota is smaller than you think it is, even putting details like a 50-year-old woman came in with this rare disease, people may know exactly who you're talking about. So the rules generally are, if a patient could read your post and know that it's about them, don't put that in there. If somebody could recognize themselves by reading your post, don't put that in there. So this, and there are consequences for doing that. So this physician was fired from her job. She was fined, and she was sent by the medical board for re-education on professional boundaries. So there can be very serious consequences for violating patient privacy online. So there are some good things about Facebook, and one of the really good things are the patient communities. And we all know that these are a little bit of a double-edged sword, but 20 years ago, if you were diagnosed with a rare disease, you maybe never met anybody who had that same rare disease. Now you can go online and you can find patient communities where you can talk to each other and get information. And a lot of patients are doing this, whether they tell us about it or not. And it's important to get in front of this. And I'll usually do that in patients who have a new diagnosis. I'll tell them, I know there are a number of online communities and Facebook communities where it's usually moms, share information. But know that the information that they're sharing and the advice you're getting may have worked for their child, but it's important for you to bring any of those ideas to me so we can talk about whether they're right for your child. So to acknowledge that you know they're looking online, give them an in to talk to you about what they're seeing online, so that you can make sure they're not doing anything at home. And this is really important for mothers and for families. They really appreciate knowing that others are out there who have gone through the same thing that they have. So next, we're going to talk about Twitter a little bit. And Twitter's the second largest social network after Facebook. And it's not really a Coke versus Pepsi kind of pairing. They're really very different social media. In Facebook, friends are really a mutual decision. So you have to ask to be somebody's friend. They have to approve that. Yes, and everyone you're friends with is also your friend. Twitter is a little bit more asymmetric. People you follow, but they don't necessarily follow you back. So Facebook allows you to connect with people you already know, and Twitter allows you to meet people you want to know, or people who have similar interests. So the first step in getting started on Twitter is setting up your bio. And this is very important because it's the first thing that someone's going to see about you when they find you online. And if you're using Twitter in a professional manner, you really should have a professional photo and be professional in your description of what you do. So the first thing you have is your name and your handle. When you first open up a Twitter account, you have to choose a handle. And if you be a professional account, make sure it's a professional handle that's relatively short. Don't call yourself Baby Bear or something like that. Then you want to have a bio, and you don't get very much room in the bio, so you have to be judicious about what you say about yourself. So I share that I'm a pediatric nephrologist, so anybody who comes across my profile online will know exactly kind of what I'm going to be tweeting about, what I'm going to be talking about. I have my little disclaimer there, tweets are my own, and then I also list my conflicts of interest. And it's generally considered best practices on Twitter or online to have your conflicts of interest clearly labeled, because if I start tweeting about studies that are being done by regulists or results from the study, people need to know that if they're going to interpret what I'm saying online, just like they need to know my conflicts when I'm standing up here in front of you talking about them. So I generally will keep my conflicts in my Twitter bio. But having said that, I don't tweet about those things at all. I really have a kind of a veil of silence around any of the products or trials that I'm involved in, and don't tweet about those. Note that I don't have anywhere in here listed that I'm a U of M employee, a UMP employee, Facebook or a Fairview employee. So I'm not tweeting for any of those. I'm not speaking for those companies, so I don't include that in my profile. However, a quick Google search will tell you that I am a University of Minnesota employee, so always assume that you're representing your institution when you're online, because people will know where you're from. I also have, you can put a link to a website. I have a link to my Google Scholar account, so that if people are interested in my academic credentials. And then on the bottom, there's a listing of the accounts you're following, and then the accounts that are following me. So that's the basic idea of what a Twitter profile looks like. So a lot of people think, well, you know, this is very complicated. There's a lot of rules I have to follow, so I'm just going to be anonymous online. And there are a ton of anonymous physician accounts online. And physicians who write anonymously will say that it really gives them the opportunity to just vent their frustrations with patients, with colleagues, administrators, without fear of crossing legal and ethical lines. But I'll warn you that the mask is going to come off, and sometimes not at the time of your choosing. There was a physician in Rhode Island who was on trial for malpractice in a case involving the death of a 12-year-old. And the prosecutors had identified that there was an anonymous blog that was describing a case very similar to theirs, written by someone with a screen name of Flea. And the blog had given information about the defense strategy, was making fun of the jurors. So when this physician was on the stand, the prosecutors asked him, in what I can only assume was a very dramatic made-for-TV moment, "Are you Flea?" And of course he had to say yes, he was Flea. And the next morning settled for a very hefty sum. So you are never as anonymous as you think you are online. And in a slightly less dramatic example, there was a new nephrologist who popped up online on Twitter a few months ago who was anonymous. But within about a week, I knew who it was just based on what they were tweeting about and who they were interacting with. So it's very easy to track people down. So my advice is really to tweet under your own name. It's going to keep you from doing something stupid. If you sign your name, you're going to be more careful with what you say and how you represent yourself. And you're never as anonymous as you think you are. All right, so now that you have your bio set up, you're tweeting under your own name, you need to know two basic things about Twitter. So one is, who should I follow? And the other is, what do I do? What do I say? So one suggestion for people to follow are professional organizations. Every professional organization has information or has a Twitter site where they feed you information about what's going on in their society. So the American Society of Nephrology is one that I follow. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a very active Twitter presence. They're very strong in advocacy, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The Minnesota AAP has a Twitter profile. So there are a lot of options for professional organizations. If you look for yours, they're probably online. Our own hospital has a Twitter site, the UMN Children's. They generally will discuss, it's mostly propaganda about the hospital. They say good things about what's going on, but every once in a while I'll see an article linked to something really interesting that one of you guys is doing that I'm not aware of. So there is good stuff that you can see on there. There are also conferences you can follow. Many of us are going to the PAS conference in a few weeks. So this is, they have a Twitter handle as well. So they will give you information about when abstracts are due, when housing opens, things that you probably get in your email but maybe didn't see. So having it in another place is useful. They'll also tweet out information about the meeting while you're there. If there's room changes, any last minute stuff, they'll have on their Twitter profile. And then one of the most beneficial things that I find on Twitter is following journals. So almost every journal has a Twitter profile. And what they will do is they'll tweet out new articles when they come through. So Journal of Pediatrics, even the big ones like New England Journal of Medicine. So by scrolling through my Twitter feed every day, I can keep up on exactly what articles have been published. I may not have to read them all or may not want to read them all, but I will know that they were published and can make a note in the back of my head that I have to go back and read these later on. So for example, recently a new gene for Bartter syndrome was discovered. And it's a rare disease, so I don't see it very often, but I can make a note in the back of my head that when a new patient comes in, instead of testing for 4 genes, now I have to test for 5 genes. And I know I can go back to that paper and look at what the phenotype was in those patients to see if it makes a difference. So it helps you to keep up with the literature in a little bit of a different way. And for me, it's a better way than my strategy for keeping up with the literature before I was on Twitter, which was really kind of haphazard. And a lot of the journals have really done some interesting things with social media. So they know that if they tweet out their article with a photograph, that they will get more engagement. They will get more downloads of that article. They will get more shares of that article. And when they make it even simpler and share it with a visual abstract, they even get more engagement with that article. Because journals want you to read their articles. Because it influences their impact factor if you read the articles, cite it somewhere. So it's in the journal's interest for you to read and to cite their articles. So a visual abstract was really invented in 2017 by Andrew Ibrahim, and he was a surgical resident at the University of Michigan. And the idea was really to rapidly, visually, and memorably communicate the core concept of a study in just a single page, multi-pane explanation of a study. So in this example, you have a title, you have a method. You can see that the study was a open label crossover study. Patients got a single oral dose of a beta blocker. Then they had dialysis, and they checked the clearance 2 ways. They either collected dialysate and did this recovery clearance method. They did timed arterial and venous blood sampling, which is called the AV difference method, and then they looked at the clearance. And the numbers aren't important unless you're a nephrologist, but you can see that the carvedilol was poorly dialyzed, atenolol was highly dialyzed, and by just really looking at this visual abstract, you can get a sense of what the article tells you. Now, clearly, there is a lot more detail about this paper that's in the manuscript itself. And the visual abstract isn't intended to completely make up for the paper. You shouldn't stop here when you're evaluating the literature. But what it's going to do is it's going to catch my interest. It's going to tell me whether this is a study that I need to know more about. And if it is, I'm going to click through and I'm going to read the whole thing. So it's a way of advertising studies. And more journals are asking you to submit these when you submit a manuscript. So for example, the Clinical Journal of the American Society of Nephrology requires visual abstracts to be submitted at the time of resubmission. So when they're pretty sure that the paper is going to be published, they ask you to create one of these. And if you need help with that, there are a couple primers online that can show you how to do this and how to make these. I'm a little partial to the first one here because I helped put that together. But there's also surgeryredesign.com, which was done by Andrew Ibrahim and has a nice little YouTube video showing exactly step by step how to do these. So I think we're going to see these more and more. So the other people to follow are really individuals. And these are going to be different depending on what your interests are. But for example, Eleanor Lederer is a physician from Louisville, Kentucky, and she's the president of the Society of Nephrology. So she heads an organization of 15,000 nephrologists around the world. And we are, over the past year, have been able to connect on Facebook or on Twitter. And through interactions with her, I've gotten to know her reasonably well. And through those connections, she's been able to volunteer me up for various committees and various other positions within the American Society of Nephrology. So having name recognition, kind of face-to-face, just people who know who you are, it can be valuable in kind of moving your career along in some of these organizations. So figure out who the counselors are in your national organizations, follow them on Twitter and interact with them. The other people to follow on Twitter are researchers. So follow researchers in your area. Dr. Miner is a basic science researcher in Alport syndrome at WashU. He puts out really good stuff. So every time he has a new article, I see it on Twitter, and I can keep up very easily with what's new in Alport syndrome. And you've heard the phrase, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Follow your competitors on Twitter. Because you want to know what they're publishing. They might let you know when they have new grants. They might post their abstracts. So you'll be able to see kind of what everybody's doing. And then finally, people here at this institution. So Dr. Berry has a very nice Twitter account where she talks, or she mostly tweets about advocacy and genetic testing. Mark Schleiss and Nancy Harper also have very nice Twitter profiles. So look around. There are people here who are tweeting. They may not be super vocal about it, but they're out there. Other physician, nephrology has a very strong Twitter group. Pediatric ICU has a very strong Twitter voice around the country. There's a number of pediatric intensivists, including Kent Tegmeyer. If people remember him, he was here about 10 years ago or so. He's very vocal now at Cincinnati Children's. And there's a very strong ER community online as well. And there's small pockets here and there of other groups. So you can find any number of individuals online with the same interests or with the same background. So when you talk about who to follow, it's also important to think about who not to follow. So I will follow just about anybody who identifies themselves as a nephrologist and kind of give them a chance. However, if they start tweeting their lunch, I don't want to see pictures of what you're eating. There will be no shortage of people online who will try to sell you something. I don't have time for that. I love television. I don't have time for that either. I don't follow a lot of celebrities. That's not what I'm on Twitter for. So you really have to ruthlessly and continuously prune your follow list. Twitter is not Facebook. You're not expected to like everybody. You're not expected to follow everybody. If you think it's awkward, you don't want to unfollow Joe Neglia, for example, you can just mute him, and then you don't have to hear him, but you're still technically following him. So don't be afraid to just cut this down. Twitter, what you see on your feed should be valuable content for you. If someone is not giving you valuable content, or you're not interested, or they're tweeting about Donald Trump 20 times a day and you're not interested in that, just unfollow them. So the next thing we're going to talk about is what to do on Twitter. So most people who use social media are consumers. So they are going to read content, they're going to click through articles, they're going to follow people. Smaller number, about 9%, are going to interact. They're going to comment on articles, they're going to comment back on your posts. And about 1% are actually creators. Those are people who create content, who write blogs, who create content for posts. So this session is really to encourage you to move from the left to the right on this graph, not politically, but just on this schematic. So when we talk about what do we post, we have to talk about how to tweet. So for some people, I realize this is too basic, but we'll just start at the beginning for everybody. And if you want any primers on how to do this, there's a number of good online sources. So the Nephrology Journal Club that we'll talk about put together a Twitter for nephrons, which isn't very nephrology specific, but it gives you some information about how to tweet. And another good source is one that I really like is www.momthishishowtwitterworks.com, and that's also a very nice introduction to how to tweet. So the anatomy of a tweet. So every tweet that you put out has your name and your screen name on there. So everything is tagged with you. So if you're putting something out there, people are going to know where it's coming from. There's the tweet text. You get 280 characters. It used to be 140, but they recently lengthened it. People are still a little bit irritated by that online, and they would like you to be a little bit shorter. So don't be too verbose. Even if you have 280 characters, doesn't mean you have to use it. Then there are hashtags. So hashtags are a way to collect content so that people can find it easily. So for example, the MWPNC is the Midwest Pediatric Nephrology Consortium. So if I click on MWPNC hashtag, it will pull up any other tweets that have ever been tweeted about the Midwest Pediatric Nephrology Consortium. So it's a way to keep things together. Then there's a link to the article that I'm talking about. There's a picture from the article that I'm talking about. And then other authors in the journal are tagged on the bottom. So by tagging somebody, by using their @ handle, that will then give them a notification that you tweeted about them. Then on the bottom is where you can see the interaction that you're receiving with that tweet. So the little arrow is to respond, so you can respond back, say whatever you want. The middle one is to retweet, which means you send it out to your followers because you think it's something people who follow you might be interested in. And then the heart is just a like, you like it. It doesn't really say much. But it's important to know that all of these things are public. So the tweets that you like, the tweets that you've retweeted, all your comments, that's all public knowledge. So if you've liked every one of Stormy Daniels' tweets over the past 6 months, that's public knowledge. And I don't judge that, but people will be able to see that if they look online. So think about what you're liking, who you're interacting with online. So what do I tweet about? What am I supposed to tweet about? So this tweet grew from a patient that I saw in clinic. It was a baby who had failed her hearing screen and had microscopic hematuria. So she was referred to me because people thought she had Alport syndrome. And I knew that she didn't have Alport syndrome because they don't have hearing loss in infancy. So I tried to find a resource that would help me put together a differential diagnosis for what else this could be. And there wasn't a resource out there. So I painstakingly went through journal articles and put together a list. And I thought, if I need this list, maybe somebody else needs this list too. So tweeted out this table of different diseases, different genetics, renal and extrarenal findings of things with Alport or with kidney disease and hearing loss. And people responded to it very well, got comments back that, hey, I was looking for this. Can I use this? So I was happy to share it. And then another physician, Paul Phelan from Edinburgh, said, hey, can I borrow this for something? And I said, sure, but you have to help me write it up. So the two of us wrote up the article, and about a year later, actually published it in a Rheault journal, so could get more or less academic credit for it. So those are examples of things that you can do. You can create your own educational content and put it online. You can also tweet about your papers. So as we talked about before, really one of the goals of academia is to disseminate your research work. You don't want to write a paper, have it die in a journal somewhere, and not have anybody read it. So by tweeting the articles out, you can help to spread your knowledge. So on the left here, for example, is an article that Dr. Chavers and Dr. Verghese and I recently wrote about our results of using plasmapheresis for recurrent FSGS. So we have a link to the article, we have some pictures, and you'll see that there's a little $ in parentheses. That's kind of Twitter shorthand for this article is behind a firewall. So it's just best practice so people know before they click through it that they're going to either have to be at work where they can get access or something else. So tweet about yourself, promote your work. That can be important. And then also on On Twitter, I have a little bit of a feminist bent, so I will tweet about women in academic medicine. I'll tweet about articles about women and women in medicine. And this was an article saying that women are underrepresented as grand round speakers. So I'm here showing that maybe we're not, but this was, I thought this was an important article and wanted to share that with my followers. So how do you measure the impact of sharing your articles online? So there's a new metric called Altmetrics, which are really an objective measure of the reach of online content. So for example, this is the article that we recently published on the hearing loss and renal syndromes. And you've probably seen this figure on websites. And this is an Altmetrics score. And it's a measure of the online reach of your article. And it's a graduated, a weighted measure of tweets and blog posts and traditional media who've talked about your article since it was published. And the numbers are a little bit hard to interpret. You really have to look at them to kind of know, what's a good score, what's a bad score. But they usually will tell you kind of in the kind of underneath it what that means. So was feeling pretty good about this. This Altmetric score of 46. It's in the top 5% of all research outputs that Altmetric tracks. So it had gotten pretty good traction out in the world. But it's really nothing compared to the boss. So this is Dr. Turcotte and Dr. Neglia's article that they published last year from JAMA. So this article got a lot of traction online and has a really kind of astronomical Altmetric score. So you may not even know that, but really lots of online discussion. And then they break it down by, was talked about by 21 news outlets, 4 blogs, 96 tweeters. And the Altmetrics aren't really just for fun. There are some academic institutions who are starting to use this as a measure of impact and national reputation for promotion. So, for example, Mayo Clinic in 2016 became one of the first academic institutions to really formally include social media scholarship as part of their promotion criteria. And one method they use is the Altmetric scores. So on our CV, where we list our H-index and the citations, they also list the Altmetric score. So just another way of measuring dissemination and impact. So what else can you do online? So there are Twitter chats that you can do in real time. And one that I participate in and I'm on the steering committee for is the NephJC, or the Nephrology Journal Club. So NephJC is a Twitter journal club. The steering committee picks an article every 2 weeks. Usually it's the newest, latest articles that come out. We try to do clinical trials when those come out, but that's not every 2 weeks. And then every other Tuesday from 8 to 9 in the evenings, if you follow the NephJC hashtag on Twitter, you can participate in the conversation. So it generally works something like this. So the journal club will tweet out a comment about the methods or about the results. People will comment back about, what did you think was a problem with those? And then we also invite the authors. So, for example, Dr. Wilson here was one of the authors of this paper, was able to give us insights about, why some of the decisions were made. So it's a really nice way to do a journal club. You can get participation from people all over the world. We do this in 2 different times so that people in the US and in Europe can participate, and get between 100 and 150 nephrologists from around the world participating in each chat. So it's really unique, and I've learned a lot about adult nephrology. I think after fellowship, I kind of let that part of keeping up with the literature fall off, but that's important, and by doing this, have really been able to keep up with that a lot better. So there's not just nephrology journal clubs. There's a rheumatology journal club. They don't meet quite as often, maybe once a month. There's a healthcare and social media journal club. There's a med ed Twitter chat that happens all about education in medicine. And then there's a very nice women in medicine chat that just started up a few months ago. And this is every Sunday night between 8 and 9. And they talk about various topics of interest to women in academic medicine. So things like imposter syndrome, childcare at meetings, promotion issues. So these can be really valuable ways to meet other people online with similar interests. And if you want more information, we did publish kind of how we do this journal club and in a real journal. It's not the Journal of Academic Twitter. So there's more information about kind of how we structure it. And I'm not going to give advocacy the time it really deserves online, because you could get a whole talk about how to use Twitter and social media for advocacy, how to advocate for your patients, for social justice issues. If you want more information about that, the American Academy of Pediatrics has a very nice social media toolkit right on their website. And the link is here, but you can Google it just as easy. And this really offers you guidance and gives you examples about how to interact with people online and how to advocate for your positions. And then this is just an example of Dr. Karagu doing that for the American Academy of Pediatrics. Recently, during the March for Our Lives, they tweeted out a number of videos of pediatricians explaining why this is an important topic. So there's a lot that you can do online as it relates to advocacy. Another very popular way to use Twitter is to tweet the meeting. And I'm sure you've all seen this, people sitting in the front row at meetings taking pictures of the slides. And this is really growing. So on the left hand here, these are the number of tweets over time, and on the right, the number of participants over time. And this is from the Kidney Week meeting, which is the big American Society of Nephrology meeting every year. So really, 2,000 out of 15,000 people participating in Twitter at the meeting. Still a relatively small percent, but it's growing every year. So before you tweet the meeting, you have to know the rules for your meeting. Every meeting has a social media policy. At the American Society of Nephrology meeting, the policy is an opt-out policy. So it is assumed that if you are presenting something, that you will allow the slides to be disseminated and have photos taken. If you don't want something shared, I would argue you shouldn't be tweeting, or you shouldn't be showing it to a room full of strangers with recording devices. But what we tell them is that they should have some kind of disclaimer on their first slide saying no photos allowed. So that's an opt-out. Other meetings haven't quite got there yet, and they will say no photos are allowed, but most people won't listen to that anyway. So what do you do when you're tweeting the meeting? You can take pictures of the slides. You can give some information about what people are talking about. You can try to augment the talks that are ongoing, and you can tweet out other articles or information that links to that. And this is useful for me personally as a way to take notes. It forces me to listen to a talk very carefully for things that are really important. And I use this almost as a note-taking mechanism. So I keep track of what's being said. It's also very useful for people who are following along at home. I can't go to every meeting, would love to, but I just can't. So if I'm at home and there's a peritoneal dialysis meeting going on, I can follow through by looking at the tweets to know, what's new, what did I miss, what's going on at that meeting. You'll notice that the pictures of the slides are a little bit crooked. Well, like anything else, there's an app for that. So this Office Lens app will allow you to take photos of slides, and then it automatically straightens them out. So this is a new tool that people can use to try to make their photos a little bit nicer. And it's also important to know what not to do when you're tweeting a meeting. Don't tweet every slide that somebody shows. No talk is that interesting, and nobody wants to follow that along. If they did, they'd be at the meeting. Don't tweet out dark pictures of people speaking. You can't really see who this is. It's not interesting. It doesn't provide any educational value. And then don't tweet pictures of slides that you can't read. So if they're fuzzy, if they're blurry, if they're sideways, nobody needs to see that. And then what else can you do online? So there's a large body of work called free open access medical education. And these are people putting out educational materials purely out of the kindness of their own heart. They're all free and available to use. So for example, here is someone tweeting out a table of ways to avoid dialysis disequilibrium syndrome. On the bottom is a little graphic about how to find your dialysis catheter tip. So there's a lot of just kind of random tweets that you'll see from people online. There are also a number of medicine-related podcasts. So this is one from the Curbsiders, who are a group of internists who have a regular podcast where they discuss different topics of interest. And the latest one was on acid base. So if you're still confused about how to calculate an anion gap or what that means, this very nicely walks through it in a fun and just interesting way. And then there's a ton of YouTube educational videos. So if you don't understand renal development, there's a nice 10-minute, very simple walkthrough of renal development on YouTube. And you may rightly ask, well, how do I know that this is all accurate stuff? These are just random people. I don't know who they are. How do I know that they're giving me good information? And I can tell you that the free online medical education kind of community really polices itself well. If someone throws something up that's not accurate, there will be 30 comments underneath it saying, hey, this isn't accurate for this reason, and they'll link to the actual sources and really try to make sure people aren't feeding you poor information. So find people whose content you trust and who don't get called out very often. Another thing you can do is play games online. So this is Neph Madness, which is a online game sponsored by the American Journal of Kidney Disease. And this is a March Madness style nephrology competition. So there are 32 teams, and each team has a educational blog post that's written about it on the American Journal of Kidney Disease website. You are supposed to then read those blog posts. You can get CME credit, 8 credits of CME for doing this. And then you choose which ones you think is the most important or the most impactful topic. So for example, there's a pediatric region this year that I did the writing for. And 2 of the teams are hypertension diagnosis in childhood or glomerular disease diagnosis in childhood. So you have to make a choice between which one of those is most important. So clearly there's no right answer, but they have a blue ribbon panel that chooses the winners of each one. And then at the end, there's one nephrologist somewhere who is crowned the winner of Neph Madness. So it's a fun way to learn about nephrology topics. So what if you need mentoring? What if you've heard this, you're interested in social media, but you just don't want to do it by yourself? So we have the Nephrology Social Media Collective, which is a social media internship. It started in 2015. I've been involved for about the past 2 years. And this is a way that we do some one-on-one mentoring of people who are getting started in social media to help them learn the ropes. This year we had a ton of applications. A lot of people are interested in getting this kind of education. We chose 25 interns to participate this year, and these are the participants we have really from around the world. This is a international sort of event. And we do things like didactic sessions online through Skype. We have them write for websites and have them participate in the journal club to try to get their foot in the door in social media. So when you're thinking about getting started on social media or stepping up your social media game, really find your own voice. I think that's the most important thing that you can do. My voice on social media, it's about 80% nephrology, about 15% my experience as a woman in medicine or as a mom in academic medicine, and about 5% completely random stuff. So try to keep it focused. Remember that everything you say is written in pen. There's no going back, no deleting. Even if you delete it, someone may have taken a screenshot. It's always there. Staying quiet and watching, following people is a good way to get started, and kind of watch people and see how they interact with each other. That's going to give you the best idea of how to use social media. So I wanted to subtitle this, How Twitter Changed My Life and Advanced My Career, but I thought that was a little bit strong. But I want to show you why this can be important. So one, why it can be important for kind of the traditional metrics for promotion in academic medicine. So we've managed to write 2 articles about social media. So those are kind of in my small education part of my CV. I've been able to leverage social media for positions on different committees on a national level. And those are important for important for promotion as well. So both through the American Society of Nephrology and also through the American Society of Pediatric Nephrology. So by being active on Twitter, people will know who you are. They're going to put your name up for positions. As Dr. Cashton mentioned, I'm one of the visual abstract editors for the Clinical Journal of the American Society of Nephrology. So that's also been a good opportunity to really understand how the editorship process works. Through some of my tweets, I have caught the eye of people at Women in Nephrology and was asked to run for their board of directors last year and was elected as secretary, so I've been able to move into that realm. And then also just the people that you meet online, the connections that you make with other nephrologists, knowing that they're going through some of the same issues that you are. So now just briefly, and I'm going to skip over this one, just a couple cases about things you might run into online. So this is a tweet that was from a nephrologist at Duke. They had a new dean by the name of Mary Klotman, very accomplished woman. And a response to that tweet from a nephrologist who shall remain unknown said, "Is that her prom picture?" So one discussion point is this an appropriate response to that picture? And then how do you handle this? Do you just let it go? Do you say something? Anybody want to comment on that? All right, so everyone agrees it's not appropriate. So the way I handled it was by Twitter shaming, which is probably not the best approach. And I'll tell you a better approach in a second. But I copy tweeted it and said something about how women shouldn't be judged on their appearance, and she's very accomplished, blah, blah, blah. But what more level-headed people did, and what I would recommend to others, is to send that person a direct message. So there's a direct message feature in Twitter where you can send something behind the scenes. Send them a direct message and say, "Hey, I'm sure you didn't realize this, but that's not an appropriate comment for these reasons." And that is what actually the author of this post did. He sent the person a direct message. They said, "Oh my God, I didn't realize that it came across that way," and then they deleted their post. So Twitter polices itself pretty well. This is another example. This is a surgery resident from Vanderbilt who posted this photo of himself back in September, kind of at the height of the NFL protests, and says, relatively non-controversial thing of, "I'm an Asian American doctor, and today I take the knee to fight white supremacy." Seems reasonable. However, you'll notice that he does it in his white coat, in his scrubs. His ID badge is visible, so it's clear that he's a Vanderbilt, and in his bio, it was clear that he was a Vanderbilt employee. So, patient saw this, patient's mother saw this. They complained to the hospital, and Dr. Gu was suspended for 2 weeks and was put on leave for a period of time. Now, they claim that he was not suspended for the content, that he was suspended for not following the social media policy of Vanderbilt University. So he didn't have in his bio, tweets are my own, not speaking for anybody else. Naturally, there was a lot of outrage that he was being silenced. Vanderbilt really held their ground, and I don't know who the right person is, but these are things you need to think about when you're tweeting online. So I hope you realize that there's a lot you can do on social media. It's not just for kind of showing your mom your pictures of your kids. And I'd really like to acknowledge the people who have taught me and guided me through social media, who shared most of the slides that I shared with you today. And then the NephJC work group and the Nephrology Social Media Collective. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Whoever gets the microphone first.
So it's timely, and thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I noticed on one of your slides, at least I think I saw, that you follow 1,800 different people. I'm just curious as to what kind of time commitment that actually is. Do you get 1,800 messages every morning when you get up?
So it's important to remember that Twitter is not email. You are not going to see every tweet that comes through, even if you only follow 100 people or 50 people. If something is really important, if a paper is really important, if there's a big new New England Journal paper, it's going to get tweeted out probably through your timeline 20 times that day, just by people sharing that content. So don't feel like you have to keep up with every person or read every tweet. There are a couple nephrologists that I follow that I find their content really valuable. They tweet out really interesting stuff. It's always good. So those are people who every once in a while I'll go directly to their site and I'll just kind of scroll through and see what I might have missed from their Twitter feed. I hate to admit how much time I spend on Twitter, but it's probably at least a half hour, 45 minutes a day.
If you're someone who already has a Twitter account and it hasn't really been as professional as maybe now you want it to be, do you recommend, and also if you're someone who has like multiple hats that you want to wear, do you recommend multiple Twitter handles, or do you recommend just kind of cleaning yours up and holding one because they're going to find your other accounts eventually? Yeah,
I think that's a tough call. In general, if you want it really focused on medicine, I would recommend a separate account. I have 5 different accounts that I juggle. For various professional organizations. I only have one that's a personal account. I don't have any anonymous accounts, so don't try to find me out anonymously online. But to really keep it professional, I would recommend having that, unless you think it, and no account is going to be 100% a professional account. There's going to be stuff that leaks into there about your political leanings. You know, every once in a while you might see a picture of my kid on there doing something. So it doesn't have to be 100% professional all the time, but it has to be not unprofessional. That makes sense. All right, enjoy your day.
You have been disconnected from the meeting.